Hey, I'm Tamara Kendacker, and you're listening to The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. So restaurants are dealing with a severe labor shortage. According to a survey by Restaurants Canada from August, 80% of food service operators said that they were finding it difficult to hire back-of-house staff, and 67% were having trouble filling front-of-house positions. Earlier this summer, our intern Rebecca Weston spent some time talking to restaurant workers about their experiences during the pandemic. Here's Peyton Ruth, a university student who'd been in the industry since she was 16 and who got a taste of what it was like to only work until 10 p.m. because of COVID restrictions.
Tips weren't as good and the money wasn't as good, but no one had to work until 3 a.m. anymore. And that was just amazing. And then whenever we got back this year, this June, whenever everything opened, they went right back into working until 3 a.m. Having to do that and to just jump right back in like nothing had changed was just so annoying, and everyone was understaffed, and everyone kind of was just trying to do their best, but I didn't want to do it anymore. So I actually quit.
There was also the added layer of the often unpleasant task of having to enforce government rules about masks and social distancing. Here's another student named Mackenzie Oliver.
I found myself having to babysit full-grown adults, people getting upset that there were certain protocols in place that then we would have to enforce, which then would affect tips, because then they were upset because they thought that for whatever reason, I as one server had the say over what we were doing in the entire restaurant. And so I decided to just quit.
Restaurants are having a really hard time bringing people back, and it's prompting a sort of reckoning within the industry. My guest today has been watching from a distance. Therese DeGrace worked in restaurants for almost 30 years, both in the kitchen and as a consultant. But after a long career, she decided that she'd had enough. She joins me today to talk about her experience, why it took the pandemic for so many people to leave, and how to fix an industry that for so long has been impervious to change. You're listening to The Decibel. Hey, Therese, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you grew up wanting to work in a kitchen and be a chef, and I wonder if you can start by telling me why that was your dream job and describe what it looked like in your head.
So I always knew that I wanted to be a chef. I grew up with an Italian grandmother who was a wonderful cook, and I enjoyed the whole process of making food. In my head, it looked like would be a very artistic type of job where I could create delicious things and experiences for people. Mm-hmm. And I did get to create all the great food. That definitely happened, but it was somewhat different than I imagined.
What was different about it? How did what you imagined compare to what your experience was actually like working in the industry?
I think that when people say that you need to have a thick skin, they don't really prepare you for what that means in this industry. It's wrought with sexism, depression, racism, abuse. So it was very unkind.
What do you mean by that? Give me some examples of what you experienced.
So the classic way of chefs learning is through apprenticeship, and you learn from other chefs. That you covet what they know. They teach you, and then you eventually sort of put your own nuances into it. There's a harshness with regards to shared information. There's this kind of disdain for the fact that you don't know, for lack of a better word, like you're an inconvenience. Mm-hmm. And then being female just compounded that for sure.
Is there one experience that stuck with you that sort of exemplifies all of these things?
So, kitchens are made for men that are 6 feet tall generally. I'm about 5'1", but I never wanted any concessions for that. I would bring a crate around. I figured it out because I wanted to learn, and I didn't want any other reason to be thought of as the weakest link. Mm-hmm. And I had to grill a lot of things, and, the commentary about that I didn't belong there, but then also daily, watch you don't burn your tits on the grill type of thing. And I had a sous chef, the job after that, who every day for 2 years, I mean, he would scream at me. He would toss recycling for me to take out in boxes, on my station. Like, he was really difficult, but he used to say that there was a party in his pants and I was the guest of honor. I put up with that for 2 years. He said that to me every single day and made it very clear what he would enjoy doing with me sexually. Take away all of this, I was probably 20 years old and he was a 45-year-old man.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what about, you hear a lot about labor conditions in restaurants. Like, obviously, what you experience sounds like a very obvious example of misogyny, which is...
For sure.
But what about the work conditions? Can you talk about that a little bit?
So no reverse air, working in kitchens so hot that would be considered like a low cooking temperature for food for huge amounts of time, little time to go to the washroom, have a drink of water, eat anything. The owners not spending money on air conditioning in the kitchen that was sufficient enough because we were cooks, we should just figure it out. Like not having proper flooring to stand on, which is really bad for your back. Being on lines that were too tight, it's really common. So that you're pushing by each other with like hot liquids, you've got knives and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I saw people pass out. I passed out once, but, that wasn't uncommon. You combine the heat of a kitchen and then in August in Toronto, and it's deadly.
Yeah, sounds just straight up dangerous.
Well, and to be honest with you, it's just miserable. So then everybody is kind of miserable, as you would be,
Mm-hmm. So what made you finally want to leave the industry and start your consulting business?
So I'm not without blame here, because I just decided after one of my last jobs that I was no longer going to propagate. I was never sexist, absolutely not, or racist or any of those things. I never allowed those things in my kitchen. But the propagation of making people work excessive amount of hours, I'm absolutely guilty of doing that myself. It was expected of me from the owners, and it was what I learned. And it was one day when I realized that I had missed over 20 years of really special occasions and things, for somebody's dinner and I had also done that in turn with other people, like to the people who worked for me. I expected the same, like, don't even ask me for a weekend off. You must work through the whole summer. Like, those things were things that I steadfast by. I did all those things. Mm-hmm. I realized that I didn't want to be treated that way, and I didn't want to treat anyone else that way anymore.
What's your understanding of what happened during the pandemic and why so many people decided not to go back?
There was a deficit within hospitality before. There weren't enough people. And I think what happened was a combination of a bunch of things. They realized when they had weekends off and summers off and, time to themselves, not working over Christmas holidays, they got a little taste of all those things and then probably divided how much they were making, on salary by how many hours they were working, and realized that maybe getting an entry-level job that paid a little less and going back to school would allow them to have work-life balance. Mm-hmm. But I think it was having that taste of what it was like to have more normalcy, because all the people that I know in the industry, like friends of mine who've left, they're like, there's nothing you could do to make me go back to that. Like, those people will not go back. They realize how much time was spent, freaking out about somebody's fettuccine, and it's like, what for?
Mm-hmm. So based on your experience, what are the factors at play that lead to this work culture in restaurants that so many people would describe as toxic or exploitative?
It's almost like you wear it with a badge of honor that you can do all that. You want to be able to fit in with your brigade and team. I think some of the younger staff will be part of that kind of sexist, racist, inappropriate kind of conversation. And then others just won't say anything because they don't want to be the person who's ousted for that. And I think that you are working with a bunch of people that are largely, the chefs govern what they're cooking, but largely ungoverned, without windows in a hot kitchen. And I think that it's kind of like a ripple effect, to be honest. And if they've worked in the industry before this, they saw this other places and they think it's fine.
I wonder also if you can explain the economic factors at play. Like, it might help people to understand how restaurants actually make money.
So, the profit margin for restaurants is very tiny. That is the truth. Most of the money is made off of alcohol. So the margin on food is very small. So we talk about waste costs, but labor costs are the hugest factor. So to pay someone on salary, they're going to be working their butts off whether 20 people come through the door or whether 200 people come through the door. But the expectation is that the work has to get done. Maybe some days you can do your job in an 8-hour span, but in order for the restaurant to make money, they need to level off that playing field, right? So the day that 200 people are in there, you might be working 15 hours, but you're still getting paid 8. So the owners definitely profit from that.
I think that is very clarifying, at least to me. Is there a reckoning happening right now, you think, at the top of the industry? Are owners understanding why so many people don't want to work for them anymore?
I think there are people who are really like, okay, if I want to survive in this, I need to start doing things differently. And they're starting to really look at those things and they're starting to adjust their behavior. But there's still people who are like, oh yeah, CERB made everybody lazy. It made everyone lazy and now no one wants to work anymore. I think that everybody always wanted to work. I think they just don't want to work the way they were working. They want to have some semblance of a life and be treated with dignity, not be yelled at. There is also something that happens within restaurants where you can be a great employee and make one human mistake and then you're kind of the black sheep. I saw that. I saw that happen in one of the restaurants I was in. Actually, one of the bartenders, she broke a very expensive bottle of wine. It was probably an $800 bottle of wine, but she sold no one sold wine like this girl. Like, she made tons of money for them. She was absolutely horrified, offered to pay for it, was like bawling her eyes out. They took the time to take that bottle and to take a solder and to cut it, and they hung it like above the door in the wine room because they wanted to remind everybody how stupid she was.
My God.
Like, it was too much. And this is somebody who was like a star employee, raked in the cash for them. But, she made one mistake. So now we should all remember what an idiot she is. And it's I think we all have these stories.
So there is a Restaurants Canada survey that showed that restaurants are trying to bring workers back with things like offering benefits, flexible work schedules, free meals, referral bonuses, higher wages, stuff like that. Do you think these things would help?
I think they'll help if they're consistent. So it's awesome to get them through the door, but how long are they going to do this for? I think that there needs to be an overhaul, and they need to have a governing body. Somebody goes around and keeps everybody in check, frankly. Like, that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. There's some restaurants that are trying to bring in HR departments. What do you think of that?
If you're going to bring in HR and you really want to make your workplace better and you stand by the way you're acting, you should have an independent company, not somebody who's working for you. If I work for a company and I'm in HR and I've seen this firsthand, I'm going to act on behalf of that company first. And how is that helpful to the employee? So I love the idea of having HR. I just think that maybe the conventional HR that we have now isn't the way to go about it. But there needs to be something. Like, people need to be accountable for their actions, and they need to follow the rules a little bit more. I started cooking when I was like 17 and I'm 47 and we're still having this conversation. That is shocking. I think that there needs to be accountability and harsher, consequences for these things happening. Mm-hmm. I think that it needs to be, like, the government needs to intervene with some of these things.
What role do you think the government could play?
I think making sure that, things like overtime, the laws of overtime are followed, because they rarely are. I think doing spot checks and being able to speak with staff on the regular in that kind of aspect where they can kind of have a bird's eye view of what's happening, where the staff don't feel like there's going to be some kind of repercussion. It needs to be as easy as our health inspections. It needs to be that, okay, the jackass police is coming around to make sure that everyone doesn't act like the fool. It should be so commonplace in kitchens that this inspector, whomever comes through, and that there's some accountability for these things.
So tell me about what you have been doing for the last 6 months and how are you doing now?
So I'm doing great. My wife had this idea. She was also in hospitality and, she'd had enough of it as well. She had this idea to start this dog-based business. And she said it, and within 2 weeks, I was like, we have 2 clients. I was like, we're doing it. We live in Grimsby, and we've got a really large property. So we had a separate building next to our house that we turned into an air-conditioned and heated dog lounge. So it's very bougie. She got her grooming license. So we do doggy daycare, boarding, grooming, dog walks, dog visits.
Sounds like a dream job, gotta say.
It's super fun. And I was just actually saying this to somebody. In all the years I worked in hospitality, I never experienced the generosity that I experienced with these dog parents, the gratitude and the love and the kindness and the reward that you get for being around them all.
I mean, you sound really happy, but
yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Would you ever go back to working in restaurants?
If something happened and there was no other way for me to make a living and I had to, be part of feeding my family, yeah, of course I would. It's a skill that I have, but I would ask people to ask other people before they asked me.
Do you have any advice for people who are still working in the industry who may not feel like they have a choice but to do that job?
I think that you always have a choice, and even if it means that you take one class in something that will lead you to a different career slowly, whatever you possibly can, or you go and volunteer at a place to see if you like that kind of a job or whatever, do whatever it takes, how slowly as it might take you to get to that next step. And I think that if people are going to stay in this industry, they need to start to set boundaries and go right in letting people know what they will and won't expect for their employment in a place. I think it's kind of their time, but it's very, very important to set those boundaries off the gate.
And what do you have to say about all of this to people who are going out to restaurants?
I don't think they understand a lot of the new. If you haven't worked in a restaurant, sometimes I think they think we're just like, oh, here we go. The things are very easy. Or there's a large microwave back there or something. Everything's made by hand and it takes time, right? You need to adjust your expectations and be happy you're there. And whoever is serving you, tip them well and be kind, because they're probably having a really hard day because they're probably dealing with a lot of really pissed off people.
Okay, Therese, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
You're welcome. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate your time.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandaker. Our producers are Madeline White, Cheryl Sutherland, and Kasia Mihailovich. Rebecca Weston helped produce this episode. David Crosby edits the show, and Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thank you so much to Therese DeGrace. If you want to email us, you can reach us at thedecibel@globemail.com. If you want to reach me, I'm on Twitter at Anima_TK. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.